Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. This is our fourth lesson in this Masechet, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 18 through 24. We have a lot of pictures today. I'm happy to be able to use a picture book that was sent as a PDF via the website called Portal Daf Hayomi. It's an Israeli website. It's also an app. So they made public a PDF of the following book, which we actually used for Masechet Sukkah. And the second half of the book is pictures for Masechet Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to see those pictures in a few minutes. So let's start at Daf 18. Daf 18 continues the discussion. Again, we are in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we're discussing changing the decree of people. How does one change the decree? We started talking about this last week. The idea of prayer is very important. And the top of Daf 18 discusses the idea of praying with intention, that two people can pray, but the person who has kavanah or intention will be answered, either will only be answered or will be answered to the best possible outcome. The Gemara says that a community can change their decree unless it has a vow attached to it. Then it cannot be changed. And the Gemara gives the example of the high priest Eli and his sons. The sons were cursed, and therefore all subsequent generations were cursed as well. The Gemara says that if you learn Torah or if you do acts of kindness, you can change these decrees. The Gemara teaches us that God listens to all who call out to him. Individuals only at certain times, and here the Gemara very clearly discusses the idea of the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur, what we call Aseret Yemei Tshuva. These 10 days are special days that individuals can ask for their decree to be changed. There is a certain closeness to God in these 10 days. However, a community can always ask for its decree to be changed. And therefore, davening, again, we've seen this before, there's a power in number. And a community can come together to pray in order to change the decrees that have been decreed upon it. Okay, I'm now going to share my screen. Let me just make sure everybody can see. Can everyone see the pictures? Okay, excellent. So as I mentioned at the beginning, let me open the chat box in case anybody wants to ask me a question. Okay, so if anybody wants to ask questions, you can still write questions in the chat box. We are going to, so the Gemara says, just before we start the Mishnah, that people pass before God kivnei marom. And the question is, what does it mean, kivnei marom? What do the words mean? One idea is kivnei amrana, which is the first picture here, which means just like sheep when they're put into their corral and they're let out one by one. When they're let out one by one, that is how the shepherd can count the sheep. That is how God kind of checks each one of us one by one, not as a group. However, right, God does judge everyone together. Another way to understand it here is kema'alot beit maron, which means, like you can see here, kind of like, standing on a very narrow path or cliff, however you would, I guess, or mountain. And here again, it's only possible in single file, and that is how God chooses to judge us one at a time, though together. Okay, the Mishnah on Daf 18 tells us that for 6 months the messengers went out to tell the people about the new month. Okay, so now we're going to transition. We were talking about Rosh Hashanah, and now we're going to talk about Rosh Chodesh. Again, very beautifully, this month begins on Friday, so Rosh Chodesh is on Friday. So how did Rosh Chodesh work? The beginning of the month, how did they determine when the new month fell out? And that's what we're going to discuss today. So the Mishnah tells us that messengers were sent out to tell the people when the new month was. I saw that Eliza pulled her calendar off her wall to see when Rosh Chodesh is, but in those days there was no calendar. How did they figure out when Rosh Chodesh was? They had to look at the moon, and that's going to be our discussion for today's class. Once they determined that it was the new moon or the new month, they sent out messengers to tell everybody. So the Mishnah tells us in Nisan, they sent out messengers so that they would know when Pesach was, and they would travel as far as they could go. In Av, they sent out messengers so you knew when Tisha B'Av was. In Elul, they sent out for Rosh Hashanah. Again, you can't send out on Rosh Hashanah for Rosh Hashanah, right? We want to prepare from the month before. Again, they would have to know when Tishrei was. In Tishrei, they would send out, not for Rosh Hashanah, because we already know that, but for the rest of the Chagim, we want to make sure that all the festivals are on the right day. Kislev, so this coming month, they would send out messengers so you knew when Hanukkah was. And in Adar, they sent out messengers for Purim. The Mishnah adds that when the temple was still around, they would send out also in Iyar for Pesach Sheni. Remember, we learned about Pesach Sheni, the second opportunity to celebrate Pesach. So the Gemara says, well, we have, this is actually a very famous daf, tells us about the fast of the 4th, the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th. These are 4 fast days. We know them as other names. The Gemara is going to explain what each one of these are. It says that during peaceful times, they actually did not fast during these fasts, but otherwise they would fast. Or if there was no peace, but there was no persecution, it was optional to fast on these fasts. Again, these fasts are going to be Shivasar b'Tammuz, right, the 17th of Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, the Gimel of Tishrei, which is Tzom Gedalia, and Asara b'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet. So we're going to go through each one. The question was, did they always fast on these days? So they say on the 10th of Av, the 9th of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, they would always fast because so many things happened on Tisha B'Av. Therefore, whether it was a peaceful time or a time of persecution, they would fast for Tisha B'Av. Okay, so the Gemara goes through each one. The fast of the 4th means the 4th month. Again, we start counting our months from Nisan. So the 4th month is Tammuz, right? So the 17th of Tammuz. The Gemara says that this is when the walls of Jerusalem were breached and no food was available, and it's in the 4th month. That's why it's called the fast of the 4th. The fast of the 5th is in the 5th month, so that's Tisha B'Av. This is when the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, was destroyed. And again, it's on the 5th month. The 7th month is Tzom Gedalia. The 7th month is Tishrei. And here, the Gemara describes, I actually teach this on Tzom Gedalia, this Gemara. The Gemara describes what is Tzom Gedalia. Many people are not familiar with this fast day. It's on the 3rd of Tishrei, meaning the day after Rosh Hashanah. And it commemorates when Gedalia ben Achikam was killed. Gedalia was the governor in Israel after the destruction of the temple. and he was murdered by another Jew, right? He was a Jew, he was murdered as another Jew, and this is very significant because it basically caused the final, I would say, the final destruction of the Jewish nation in Israel. Meaning, after the destruction of the temple, there was still a community of Jews who lived in Israel, but after the death or the killing of Gedaliah, everybody was exiled. If they weren't exiled to Bavel, after Gedaliah, they went to Egypt, and that was the destruction of the community in Israel. And here the Gemara says this is so important. It's equated with Tisha B'Av, right? We see Tisha B'Av as being a very serious fast day. The Gemara says Tzom Gedalia is of equal importance because it is also the destruction of the Jewish community. Asara B'Tevet happens in the 10th month. This is when Jerusalem was surrounded. It was the siege. So the question here is, the Gemara says, at the beginning, our Gemara mentioned the fasts in order of the calendar, right? 4th, 5th, 7th, 10th. But it's not chronological, right? Because the last fast that was mentioned was Asara B'Tevet. That's actually the beginning of the destruction of Jerusalem. So the Gemara does it in chronological order. Or another way to understand it is that the 5th of Tevet, we mentioned Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, but on the 5th of Tevet was another day, which was when the exiles, when the people in the exile found out about the destruction of the temple. So this is another possibility of another fast day. And then all the fasts would be in chronological order, right? In Tammuz, there was the breach in the siege. In Av is the destruction of the temple. In Tishrei, it was Tzom Gedalia, the killing of Gedalia, and then in Tevet would be when the people in exile found out about the destruction. From here, the Gemara discusses what's called Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit was a scroll that enumerated certain days that were fast days, or the opposite, certain days that you were not allowed to fast, meaning holidays that were commemorated that you could not fast on it. So the Gemara says that when the temple was destroyed, we don't have days that you can't fast, meaning that when there were certain holidays, again, not the holidays that we're familiar with, but certain holidays that had to do with that time period, they were nullified after the destruction of the temple. Or, says the Gemara, no, they were not nullified, and you still could not fast on those days. Hanukkah being one of those time periods, you cannot fast on Hanukkah. It's a public holiday. And maybe it's different than the days that were in Megillat Ta'anit. Okay. The Gemara talks about so it says that the Greeks wouldn't. It gives a story that the Greeks wouldn't let the Jewish people write God's name in secular documents, and when the Hashmonaim when they came to power, they instituted that you can. But then they said, no, maybe you'll throw out your document and that wouldn't be good. It has God's name in it. And therefore they made a festival on this day, which was Gimel Tishrei. And that was during the temple. And again, maybe this has nothing to do with Megillat Ta'anit, or maybe it does. Again, we're looking for days that would be festivals that you cannot fast on those days, that might have been nullified after the destruction of the temple. Daf 19 tells us that you can't fast the day before or the day after one of these festivals or happy days, these days that were written in Megillat Ta'anit. Another one of these days is the 29th of Adar. This became a festival because, again, the government said that Jews can't study Torah or they can't do Brit Milah. And then the people demonstrated, and then the Romans changed their mind, and then they made it a day of festivities. It became a festival. This happened after the destruction of the temple, and this is one of those days that you're not allowed to fast. Again, the question is, do these days have significance nowadays or not? It seems that nowadays these days do not have significance. Um, Okay. Okay. From here, we're going to discuss the length of the month. So it's important to understand that Jewish months are either 29 or 30 days. Um, the Gemara tells us on Daf 19 that Elul is always 29 days. So if it's always 29 days, then why do we need messengers to come out in the beginning of Elul to tell us when Rosh Chodesh is? Because we know that it's going to be 29 days. Again, if we know it's 29 days, we just count the days, and then we can figure out when Rosh Hashanah comes out. The Gemara says that if they needed to extend Elul, then they could send out messengers. But if not, then you don't need messengers. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that it's important for everyone. Again, I think we would understand that it's very important for everyone to keep the festivals at the right time. So they wanted to ensure that everybody had a consistent calendar. Again, there's no calendar hanging on the wall. They're looking at the sky or counting days. They don't know when the new month begins. What if it's a leap year? Again, this this year is a leap year. So what happens if it's a leap year? The question is, do they send out messengers on the second Adar, right? And it's a machloket if they do. And since we're talking about a leap year, again, it's important to understand that a Jewish leap year, as opposed to a secular leap year, right? In a secular calendar, you add one day in February, right? In a Jewish leap year, we add an entire month. We are going to add an entire month of Adar. And if that sounds familiar, Adar is when we celebrate Purim. So the question is, if we have two Adars, which is the real one, right? When do we celebrate Purim? So the Gemara says it's actually a machloket. We have a disagreement when we keep the mitzvot of Purim. And the Gemara says, no, it's not a machloket. Everybody agrees that you keep Purim and all the mitzvot around Purim in the second Adar. Because again, it's the Adar right before Nisan, right, which is going to be Pesach. So we want those 2 months to be connected. Therefore, Adar Aleph, the first Nisan, is seen as the extra one. Adar Bet is seen as the original one, which is interesting. And that is how we're going to celebrate it this year. Adar Bet is going to be when Purim is. Okay. So here, the Gemara says that if we're going to add a second Adar, which month is going to be 29 days? Which month is going to be 30? And here there's a whole disagreement. Maybe one needs to be 29 and one needs to be 30, or both are 30, or both are 29, and there's a whole disagreement at the bottom of Daf 19. Okay, let's go to Daf 20. And the Gemara says that here is a very fundamental discussion of what is most important to sanctify the month. Is it that we have a commandment to sanctify the month with actually seeing the moon? It's called Ri'iyah, right? To see the moon. And therefore, every month, witnesses used to come to the temple in order to testify that they saw the new moon. We're going to see lots of pictures about this in a minute. And so much so, says the Gemara, and this is so important, that they can even transgress the Shabbat, meaning they can get on their donkey I was going to say drive and ride to Jerusalem on Shabbat in order to give their testimony. And this was so we make sure that we know exactly when Rosh Chodesh was going to be. The Gemara says that Elul in general is 29 days, but sometimes they extended it, and that's why we needed the messengers to come out on for Elul and for Tishrei. Okay, again, why would they want to extend it? We actually learned this in Masechet Yoma, and I think even in Beitza, when we talked about not wanting Yom Kippur to fall out right before or after Shabbat. Remember, we talked about that. We wanted to make sure that our food was fresh for after Yom Kippur. Or what if someone passed away and they needed to bury the body? We don't want there to be a situation where you can't bury the body, and therefore they would try to extend the month so that it wouldn't be that Yom Kippur fell out right before or right after Shabbat. Okay, interestingly enough, the Gemara says that they would scare witnesses to not give testimony in order to extend the month because of what we just mentioned, but you can't scare them into saying that they did see something, right? It seems that you could kind of prolong sanctifying the month, but you cannot bring it earlier, right? That would be, I guess the way they see it here is it's more lying if you said you saw something when you didn't. It's maybe less lying if you didn't get around to testifying about it till right the day after. Okay. All right. Let's talk about seeing the moon, right? So it's important to recognize, right, when we see the moon, I think some of these things are obvious, but we'll just remind ourselves, right? When we see the moon, we're seeing light that is being reflected from the sun onto the moon, right? And depending where the moon is, that's how much we're going to see of the moon, right? So when the moon is on the other side, right? If it's the earth, the sun, the earth, and then the moon, right? Meaning when the moon is opposite the sun, with the earth in the middle, we're going to see a full moon, right? Because it is going to be kind of, let me see if I can do it like this, right? It's going to be fully reflected on the face of the moon, right? When it's the sun, the moon, and then the earth, right? I'm going to show you pictures in a few minutes. Then we are not going, let me see, hold on. Okay, here, this is a good picture, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Right, so just for argument's sake, for real, right? The moon travels around the earth, okay? The earth and the moon travel around the sun, right? But we're going to focus on the moon, right? When the moon is in this position, if you can see here in the picture, right? When the moon is in this position, which is the sun, then the moon, then the earth, we're not going to see the moon. Okay, this position is called the molad. Molad means the new moon, right? We do not see this. If the moon is slightly to the right or slightly to the left, we're going to see a sliver, right? Either right this way or this way. We'll see that in a minute. You can see it here on the picture, right? Here's that sliver. If it's slightly over, I guess like this, right? So then you'll see it. But when it's directly in the same line as the earth, that's called the new moon. Okay, and that's we don't see the moon then, but you will see this sliver. Okay, and interestingly enough, again, you're going to only really see this sliver of the new moon at sunset. Here is the sun going down, and it's reflecting on the surface of the moon. that is at sunset. That's when you can see the new moon. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so Shmuel says that he can calculate the calendar and he doesn't need witnesses. Um, and then there's a statement that night and day need to be part of the new moon in order to see it. And we're going to try to understand what that means. So the Gemara explains to us that if the molad, right, those of you who are familiar in the shul, when they announce Rosh Chodesh, they say the molad or the new moon will be seen right on Tuesday at 4 parts and 32 seconds. They're telling you the exact moment that the moon is in this position. Now, the Gemara teaches us that if this happens before midday, then you're going to be able to see the new moon that sunset. Why? Because again, remember we said that in order to see that sliver, the moon needs to move a drop to the left in this picture, right? A drop to the left, and you need time for that to happen. So, and the only time to see it is sunset. So, if the molad is before midday, you can see the new moon at sunset. If it happens after sunset, then there's not going to be enough time for the moon to move over to see that sliver, and you're only going to see the new moon the next day. So that's what we're talking about in terms of witnesses coming to testify when the new moon is. And here we're going to talk about how they interrogated the witnesses and what they asked, and how they would see it. Okay, so 1 second. All right. So Daf 21, it tells us that you cannot have 2 months of 29 days in a row. That would be too much, and you would hear about it. And there was a story about people in Bavel who confused the dates. Again, think about how connected we are when we look at our calendars. The calendar was very important, so we needed to make sure we knew when every day, when the days were, when the new month started, and therefore this is all going to be very important information. Okay, places that the messengers didn't reach in Tishrei, but they did do for Nisan, they need to keep 2 days. Okay, again, those of us were asking, how did we talked about this in the last Masachet and in a few Masachtot when we talk about 2 days of the festival that you keep outside of Israel. The reason we did this was the messengers couldn't get to these places in time to tell them when the new moon was seen, and therefore they weren't sure, and that's why they kept 2 days. What about Yom Kippur? There's actually a story that someone fasted 2 days in a row on Yom Kippur because they didn't know what the correct date was. So it's very important, it's very important to understand the day. Here on the Gemara on 21, it tells us that if the moon is setting as the sun is rising, okay, so we talked about the new moon is seen at sunset. That means the moon is going down as the sun is going down. However, in the middle of the month, and those of you who are familiar with the moon rising and setting, in the middle of the month, on the 15th of the month, as the sun sets, the moon is going to rise in the opposite sky, right? So generally, right, again, the moon, right, the sun sets in the west, and the moon is going to rise in the east at the same exact time. Interestingly, and that only happens on the 15th. But the Gemara says that if you're at sea, and that's this picture here, if you're at sea, you can actually see the moon rising on the 14th as well. And therefore, the Gemara says that if you see the moon rising at sea, again, only at sea because you can really see the horizon, then you can burn your chametz that day. You know that it's the 14th of Nisan. For if it's not at sea, it's only on the 15th that you see the moon rising. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us that witnesses can transgress the Shabbat in order to bring testimony to Jerusalem, as we said before. Maybe only for Nisan and Tishrei. Again, those would be the most important months because of the holidays. Maybe during the time of the temple, it could be every month because we want to make sure that all the sacrifices were brought at the right time. The Gemara tells us that messengers were sent out right after they sanctified the month for Nisan and Tishrei. And they had for Nisan and Tishrei, they had to wait till they actually heard the sanctification of the month. So we'll talk about what that means in a minute. The Gemara says that the festivals are what's called Mikra'ei Kodesh, right? You have to sanctify them. How do you sanctify them? They have to be established at the proper time. And therefore, it's so important that the holidays are at their proper time, that you can even be mechalel Shabbat, you can transgress the Shabbat in order to sanctify the month. The next Mishnah tells us, hold on one second. 1 minute. Okay. The next Mishnah tells us that if the moon was seen clearly in the sky or not, you can transgress the Shabbat. Meaning, what does that mean? Right? Let's say it was very easy to see the new moon. You might say to yourself, oh, if I saw the moon, I'm sure 50 other people also saw the moon, so I don't need to go to Jerusalem to bring testimony. The Gemara says, no. Whether it's clear or unclear, and here's a very cool picture of unclear, right? Again, you have to be able to see the moon. This is not clouds. This is some sort of like haze. But we'll talk about clouds in a little bit. But if you see the moon directly, whether it was clear or not, you need to go testify. One time, the Gemara tells us that one time 40 pairs of witnesses came to Jerusalem, and they had thought maybe they should stop them and say, listen, don't go to Jerusalem. We already know that there's so many people going. The Gemara says, no, don't stop them, because if you stop them now, then next time when it's not so clear, they're not going to want to come, because they're going to be like, oh, they stopped me last time. They're going to stop me again, so I'm not coming. So they said, don't stop them, let them go. Okay, the Gemara says that 50 gates of wisdom came down to this earth. 49 of them went to Moshe, which leaves us one gate of wisdom for everybody else in the world. But what about Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon? Right, we know that he was very, very wise. He wanted to be like Moshe. The Gemara says, no, nobody can be like Moshe. Or the Gemara says, well, no prophet can be like Moshe, but maybe a king could be like Moshe, and that would be King Solomon. We know he was very, very wise. The top of Daf 22, we have a new Mishnah. It says that a father and a son can go together to testify for the new month. Now, again, we know that in general, relatives, right, a father and a son, cannot testify together. They are considered disqualified, but the Gemara tells us that they can for the new moon. Or maybe it's that if one of them gets disqualified, then the other one can go and join another group. So the more the merrier. It maybe doesn't mean that they can testify together, but maybe they'll be able to testify separately. The Gemara tells us that, right, God told Moshe and Aaron HaChodesh hazeh lachem, right? This new month is for you. The Gemara learns from here, if God told two brothers, right? Moshe and Aaron are two brothers. So if God told two brothers, so then we know that two brothers can testify in order to sanctify the month. And the halacha is that relatives can give testimony for the new month. The next Mishnah on 22 tells us that disqualified AD, certain people are disqualified to give testimony. These are gamblers, people who lend money on interest, pigeon racers, people who trade produce from the Shemitah year, and servants. All of these people are disqualified to give testimony in general. Any testimony, and then the Gemara says that any testimony that a woman is invalid, then these people are also invalid, meaning this is a group that most of the time are not allowed, but sometimes they are allowed. And the Gemara tells us certain times when women are able to give testimony. And the Gemara tells us that there are instances where they are valid witnesses, and therefore these groups of people might also be valid witnesses for other cases. The next Mishnah tells us that if a witness can't walk, he can take a donkey or a stretcher, even on Shabbat, and his attendants can come with him, and they can bring sticks for self-defense, and they can take provisions for the journey, again, showing the importance of this testimony. Okay, with that, we finish the first chapter of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and now we're going to start the second chapter. Let's talk about these witnesses. The Mishnah tells us that if the court does not recognize the witnesses who have come, then you need to send people from the local court in order to vouch for these people who are coming to testify. And this is all because of a sect called the Baitusim. They were seemingly always trying to mess up the rabbis in this time, and therefore they would send false witnesses with false testimony in order to trick the Jewish people into celebrating the holidays at the wrong time. And therefore, the Gemara says that you have to be very careful when you accept new testimony from people you do not that you do not recognize. So it seems that you send a pair of witnesses to vouch for this pair of witnesses. There's a discussion if one witness can validate testimony of another, or do you need two? And again, maybe if it's people that they recognize, you don't need them. Excuse me. And then the Gemara tells a story about the Baitusim who, again, tried to trick the sages and sent false witnesses. And actually, there's a whole very dramatic story of these two witnesses that were paid to give false testimony, but it turns out that one of them was bad and one of them was good. And when they interviewed the good one, he told them that, oh, you should just know that the Baitusim hired me and I came so that I could tell you that the other guy is really bad. And that's how they found out that this is what they were doing. Okay, the next Mishnah. How did they signal to the Jewish people that it was the new month? We mentioned previously that there were messengers, but the Mishnah tells us that originally they used to wave torches in order to signal that it was the new month. And this would work, and the Gemara is going to tell us how it works, how they would signal from one mountaintop to another. But again, those Baitusim kept trying to trick the Jewish people, and they would light fires randomly, and therefore they decided to send messengers and cancel the fire on the mountains. So the Mishnah says that they made these very large flames, and then they would wave them up and down, and then right and left. It was a signal in order to signal that it's not a regular fire, but this was Rosh Chodesh, and then it would go from mountain to mountain. The Gemara enumerates each mountain that was like the point for the next to get it all the way out to the exile. The last one was Beit Baltim, and that would tell everybody in the diaspora when the new month began. So here the Gemara says that they would only wave torches when the moon was seen after the 29th, and then they would sanctify the 30th, and then they would wave the torches the night of the 30th, which is already the 31st. And they would not wave the torches when the month was full, meaning when it was 30 days, then they would not wave the torches. The Gemara says that, so now we're going to Daf 23, that again, this would lead to miscalculations, because what if it was a Friday night and they wouldn't light these bonfires on Friday night, and we were scared that they were going to miscalculate. From here, the Gemara talks about the wood that made these torches. They were actually made out of 4 types of wood, and here the Gemara talks about one of the types was this coral, and here's a picture of how they used to harvest coral from the bottom of the sea, and how they would tie it with these heavy this rope from a very big ship, and that's how they would harvest coral, and that was meant, that is part of these torches. Okay, Beit Baltin was Biram, says the Gemara. This was the last station, and from there, everyone in Pumbedita in Bavel would see the light of the fire, and then they would light all their torches, and then the person in Beit Baltin would understand, they got the message. The Gemara says that it's 8 parsot. That's a difference. That's a distance. So it's 8 parsot in between each mountain, which is a total of 32 parsot. That's more than a mile, I think, between each mountain. Okay, next Mishnah, Beit Yazek was the courtyard where all the witnesses would come, and the court would question them, and they would bring a lot of food there to make sure that the witnesses were comfortable. Again, they just took a long journey, so they want to make sure that they were happy. Once they got there on Shabbat, they couldn't move from there because, again, Tum Shabbat, they're limited in the space that they're allowed to move. And then they decreed that no, they could move within 2,000 amot of Jerusalem. The Gemara tells us again where this area was in the temple courtyard. The next Mishnah tells us that they would start questioning the witnesses. Okay, so here we go. We're going to have a lot of pictures now. So actually, this is very interesting, as the new moon should be around Thursday, Friday, right? Again, Friday is Rosh Chodesh. So all of you around sunset, start looking at the sky Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, and see what you can see. Okay, so we're going to talk about what does the new moon look like. So what would they do? They would take the first pair, and they're going to, like, the first pair that came is the first pair that is questioned, and they would divide them, and each witness is questioned on their own. What would they ask? So they would say, how did the moon look? Was it in front of the sun or behind the sun? So that means, this is what it means in front of the sun. Right here, you can see the sun is setting over here on the left of our picture. So the sun is to the right, which means to the front of the sun, but really, geographically, it means was the moon to the north of the sun, or was it, you can see here, to the south of the sun? And we're going to see what the difference is in a minute. How high was the moon? Right here, you can see. Was it very low on the horizon, a little bit higher? Um, and the Gemara tells us that if he said that the moon was in front of the sun, meaning that meant to the north, um, okay, and then we'll discuss what that means. Then they would bring in the second witness, and if they said the same thing, okay, and then they would actually question all the other witnesses because they didn't want them to feel superfluous, and then they wouldn't come back the next time. The Gemara tells us that, wait, aren't all these questions the same? Basically say, how did the moon look? So the Gemara says, no, it's very important. Another question is, where was the, I guess we'll call it the back of the moon, right? Was it facing the sun, or was it, um, wait one second. Where is the sun here? Yes. Okay. Right. Was it, you see, facing, I guess, right to the north was the opening, or was the opening to the south? Okay. And again, we're going to discuss what that means. The Gemara okay, so let's talk about also like the astronomy of this, and then we'll talk about, right, the reality. So first of all, the Gemara says you could never have this picture on the left. Okay, you can only have the picture on the right. Why is that? Again, you can figure it out. If the sun is the thing that's shining on the moon, then if the sun is setting, you're going to see the back of the moon, right? That's this picture on the right. The picture on the left would mean, again, this is good for my mother-in-law who's an artist, right? If the picture on the left would mean that the sun is shining on the top of the moon, that can't be because the sun is about to set. So that doesn't work, right? So this picture shows us if the witness says, right, that it was curved, right, with the curve facing the moon, that is false testimony. It has to be that it's curved away from the moon. Again, you have to see that the sun is shining on the bottom of the moon. I hope that is clear in the way I explained it. Okay, so that's number one way to figure out who is giving true testimony and not. Okay, an interesting concept is that we know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But did you know that throughout the year, that, right, it's not always, most of the time, it's not directly east-west. It is most of the time either a little bit to the north or to the south. And the Gemara explains here, and we can explain it, right? This is just for the people who want to understand the astronomy, right? The earth is tilted on its axis, right? We're not straight up and down north-south. We're a little bit tilted, right? That's why we have the seasons. So in the summer, we are going to be tilted more to, we're going to be tilted towards the sun. And therefore, again, what did I just say? In the summer, the moon is going to be, wait one second, I want to make sure I get it right. I love it, right? The summer, right, sorry. If we're okay, right. So in the summer, the moon is going to be tilted to the south, right here in this picture, tilted to the south. You can see here at the bottom they put a compass. Up is west, right, because the sun is setting. East is right behind us. North is to the right of our picture, and south is to the left. So if the moon is to the left of the sun in the What did I just say? I'm sorry. If the moon is to the south, that is going to be in the summer. And here you're going to see the moon to the north of the sun in the winter, right? Yemot Hagshamim means the rainy season, which is the winter in Israel. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, I hope it was not too confusing. I brought you the pictures. You could look it up later. Um, Okay, another thing they talk about is, remember we asked, what about the height? Where was, right, they ask about the height of the moon from the horizon. The Gemara says that if there's a discrepancy of one cattle prod, and here you can see what that means in terms of the sky. If there's a discrepancy of one, then that's okay. If it's a discrepancy between two, that's already too much, right? So you can see from the picture all the way on the right to the picture all the way on the left is a significant difference, but between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, it's less of a difference, and therefore that testimony is accepted. The Gemara continues and says that if you saw the moon indirectly, you could not give testimony. What does it mean indirectly? So here are some pictures, right? You saw only the reflection of the moon in the water, or you saw it through a glass, right? Through the window. That could have distorted the picture or the moon, so that's not enough. If you saw it through a cloud, that's not enough because maybe it's going to be really a cloud. Like here's a picture. Um, what if you saw it half uh, half in the sky and a half in the as a reflection, right? So half and half. What about that? You cannot testify. Um, what about again here? Half clearly, half in the fog. You cannot testify. Half in the window, half in the real. You cannot testify. And here they show you a picture of right what it looks like. This is really a cloud. You think it's a moon, but it's really the cloud, and therefore that would not be good testimony. From here, the Gemara says on Daf 24 that the head of the court would say Mikudash, right after they sanctified the month. They would say it is sanctified, Mikudash. Everybody there would repeat it twice. And this would happen either on the 30th or the 31st, or if it was seen on the 31st, you don't sanctify it because we already sanctified it in the heavens, meaning it was already late, and therefore you don't need to sanctify it again. Again, they bring a verse why it's important to sanctify it. Asher tikreu otam, right? We need to sanctify the months so that we can sanctify the festivals. Okay, the last Mishnah on 24 talks about Rabban Gamliel, who had pictures to show the witnesses what the moon looked like, and then he would question him: Did it look like this? Did it look like that? So then the Gemara says, hold on. How could it be that he had pictures of the moon? Doesn't it say in the Torah that you're not allowed to make pictures of heavenly beings or heavenly items? The Gemara also says you're not allowed to make pictures of the temple. Don't worry, in the end, you're allowed. Or the menorah talks about not being able to reproduce the menorah. Maybe you can't reproduce it in gold. Maybe you can't even reproduce it in wood. And that again, remember, we know that you're not allowed to make images. So how does it work that this would be okay? Maybe the Gemara talks about the image of God's throne, the Kisei HaKavod. The prophets say that the throne of God was sat on 4 figures. And maybe the Gemara says maybe it's those 4 figures that you're not allowed to make an image of, but maybe one of them you are allowed, right? Maybe you are allowed to make an image of a moon. Maybe that would be okay. But then the Gemara says, no, you can't make images in order to worship them, but you can make them for maybe for educational purposes. Or maybe Rabban Gamliel had non-Jews make the images, and that would be okay. From here, the Gemara talks about signet rings. Again, we're making images, we're engraving an image. So the Gemara says that a ring with a protruding image, that's this, right, where it's protruding, that um, that can't be worn because again, we're suspicious that maybe it will be worshipped as idolatry, but it can be used as a seal. But a right, and now look at this ring where it has indentations. That that ring can be worn because we're not concerned about you worshiping indentations in a ring, but it can't be used as a seal. I think the idea is that this seal can more easily be, I guess, counterfeited as opposed to this seal, which I guess is harder to reproduce. So that's just interesting. Um, and finally, at the bottom of Daf 24, the Gemara says, oh, no, no, no. It's not that Rabban Gamliel made images or complete images. Rather, he made partial pictures. You can see here, each one of these slats of wood has a partial image, and they would put them together and then take them apart so as to not create these images of the moon, but it would be enough for Rabban Gamliel to point and say, point to the shape of the moon when you saw it in the sky. And now you all know which ones, we should play a game, right? Which one would be considered a good new moon and which one would not, right? Again, obviously, this one on the bottom towards the right, this curved, that cannot be the new moon. We know that if it's a full moon, that can't be, right? So it's just very interesting to see all these pictures. And again, these pictures were used for educational purposes to make sure that they were able to sanctify the month. So next week, we're going to continue with more images about the moon. But with that, we are going to end today's shiur. Just a few announcements. I'm going to be traveling for the next 2 weeks. We will be having class, but it will be at different times. So I will send an email, but next week the class is going to be on Sunday, actually. So that's in a few days from now. It's going to be on Sunday. I think it, I don't remember the final time that we decided, so I will let you know. I think it's 11 a.m. Israel time, but I will check it, and I'll send an email. And then we're going to do the next class the following Sunday, where we are going to finish Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and then hopefully the week after that, I hope to do a regular class. So please stay tuned. Check your email. I hope everyone gets their email and their messages, and I will send out exactly when the class will be. And for those of you who cannot be at the live class, the class will always be recorded, and you can listen to the recording. So wishing everyone a great week.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. And I want to tell you that was one of the